complex as the problems are that you just laid out, I actually think it's more complex. And if you go, I mean, I went to this area for the first time in 1996, before there was a road to Waskaganish. And the road has brought in, you know, hockey rinks and stores, but with the stores has come diabetes. There's also been drugs. But it's very easy to be sort of sentimental or you know, whatnot about, hey, you know, they used to have this great life and whatnot. But the Cree have really, as a sovereign nation, made a decision in the villages that are not affected by the dams to move forward with this project. And we really have to respect that and listen to that. So I think it's a very, very complex issue. And that's, I'm not being an apologist for this man, you know, who didn't become a tally man anymore because his family was so angry with him and whatnot. But it is unbelievably complex, you know, and the shift that we've seen in people like Matthew Kunkam, who really need to be reminded of their rhetoric from the early 90s, is a result of real division in these communities. So to keep it on topic here, instead of what we could get into the bigger issues of the contract, we're both lawyers, but I don't know if that's helpful.
Meredith?
Well, just to respond to that, you know, from a different perspective, I was thinking her comments and questions were more for us.
Absolutely.
You know, do we go to the
here.
PUC? Do we go to the legislature? Do we go to city council and push for efficiency and real renewable policy?
Right.
You know, that
Prior
was,
to.
And by the way, there is already, there are already people drafting amendments to our renewable portfolio standard law so that this line will qualify, which will have all kinds of repercussions for people trying to do other kinds of renewables. But, you know, I think that people here need to get much more involved. I mean, I work with the PUC every day, and I can count on both hands the number of times a real person comes in and gives a public comment who isn't, you know, actually involved in the project. And the same with the city council and also the Concord Energy Committee. You know, it's just, you know, it's not really succeeding in pushing the city to be more energy efficient. So I mean, I think there are real, just grassroots local things that we need to be doing to use less. You know, the whole New England area demand is really down, and if we could keep that flat even as the economy comes back, I mean, that's really, talk about voting with your wallet. Or
And just to speak to that, I mean, the NERC, which is a pretty conservative group, they're the North American Electric Reliability Council, their planning horizon ends in 2019. And, you know, they predict that New England is not going to have any load growth, significant load growth between that time. And New Hampshire is already, and this hasn't been mentioned yet tonight, a net exporter of electricity to the other states in the region. So it's really important for us to hold the line, but also to keep conserving and whatnot. So I think that's a great message.
Tom, did you want to add anything, or?
No, just I think you know, accountability is critical, and I think the more people and you know, the more there is a grassroots push for our policymakers to start making the right decisions and emphasizing things like energy efficiency rather than generating, you know, more and more capacity is critical.
So we can do it.
And I think you know, this Northern Pass proposal, I sort of mentioned that there's not a lot of information out there about it. You would think, you know, a $1 billion project, 180 miles worth of transmission, 1,200 megawatts coming into the state, applying for a presidential permit, you would expect an application of that type to be pretty significant. It's about a 30-page application with a lot of gaping holes in it and certain claims. And, you know, one of the claims is this project will reduce greenhouse gas emissions in New Hampshire. It will advance the goals of the New Hampshire Climate Action Plan. It's possible that it could, but, you know, bringing in this additional capacity, what's going to come offline? Is coal going to come offline? Are we going to take shut down Merrimack Station while we bring in this relatively cleaner energy? What impacts would importing these 1,200 megawatts have on the development of local renewable energy? Will it suppress energy costs in a way that undermine energy efficiency efforts. So there are a lot of questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, so ask the questions, ask your politicians the questions, ask Northern Pass the question. Alex, do you want?
Well, I see there are a lot of hands, but I do.
Okay. Gentleman in the back?
Yeah, would you go over how many megawatts are presently coming in from Hydro-Quebec, and how much is being produced by other sources in the region, nuclear?
Sure, I mean, Vermont has a contract for, I think, about 36% of their electricity right now. And that's what I was talking about when I said a PPA or whatever. It's this long-term agreement to have Hydro-Quebec power coming in. And then New Hampshire really doesn't get any Hydro-Quebec power right now.
But you got 120 additional megawatts proposed in Northern Pass, right? 112,000.
No, 1,200.
Which is
1,200
equivalent
megawatts.
to Seabrook.
Yeah, but how much is coming in now from Hydro-Quebec?
To New Hampshire, none.
But
None.
it goes through.
No, because we haven't built this line yet.
No, but there was a line that I actually worked on,
Yep.
you know, back in the 80s that brought Hydro-Quebec power down. I'm asking how many megawatts is already coming in now?
Is that working still then, or?
Sure.
I don't know.
It goes down to Sandy Point, I think.
It does?
I'm pretty sure, yeah. It's a DC line.
The-
It
yeah.
goes down to Sandy
So
Point.
it bypasses New Hampshire
Yeah.
Oh,
and
it goes through
ends up in
Vermont
the grid
and-
farther
Uh,
south.
No, it goes through, it goes, yeah, it goes, but it bypasses,
Right.
it doesn't send off
Because,
energy
yeah.
into New Hampshire, but it goes through New Hampshire.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's the significance of this being that line and this proposed line being a direct current line. It bypasses all the communities it goes through. I mean, it leaves the communities with the impact of having major transmission going through it, but it's a line that you can't tap into or tap off of.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get at is how much is already coming through from what you might call Hydro-Quebec, James, area, and how much is this gonna be in addition to?
Well, this is gonna be an addition of 1,200 megawatts.
And how much is already coming?
I guess we don't know that.
We don't know how much is going to Massachusetts on the existing
We
line.
don't know how much is coming in from,
We know that about 36% of Vermont's power is coming in mostly through, what's the interconnect in northern
Yeah,
Vermont?
not Highgate, it's, yeah.
And we know that the Rupert diversion project is about equal to, like, finished Rupert diversion project is about equal to the amount of electricity that Vermont consumes. And they will make that claim, but the problem is that there's tons of line loss, as you know, having worked on transmission. And so that's a claim that may make sense if you're saying that they have enough electricity in the north, but by the time that it gets to Vermont, you've lost maybe 10%.
Okay,
Right,
another question over
And
here?
in the Northeast, what percent of the power is coming from hydro? And
Very little.
very little,
Yeah.
even with the Hydro-Quebec, I would have
And
to be.
As a percent.
And I think sort of the bigger picture view is we have about 32,000 megawatts of generating capacity in the region, which is 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts more than we need. So, and natural gas is making up a lot of that surplus, but we have surplus right now. So we're talking about bringing in more.
There's a really important piece of the puzzle here, very, very quickly. We tend to think of power coming in. The lines work both ways. One of the really important things about all these hydro projects is that whole regional structure that you saw, that vast hydroelectric facility, literally can be turned on and off in about half an hour. Okay? And so what Hydro-Quebec does, and is one of the reasons why they want these new lines to come into New England, is that when we're generating with nuclear and oil and gas plants that take days and days and days to go up and down, and we don't like to turn them off, the price of power is often quite low. In fact, every once in a while we pay to get power off the grid, and Hydro-Quebec buys. They buy it cheap. And then when the price of power goes up in the summertime with air conditioning or wintertime with lights, that's when they sell. And so Hydro-Quebec makes hundreds of billions of dollars playing that game. almost $1 billion in 2008 when fuel prices were so high. So that's part of their business model too. So it's not, they are not just a producer of a utility that we're buying. They are brokers within a larger sort of capital market, which they play to great advantage.
But it's probably worth mentioning here that Hydro-Quebec posted a loss last quarter because they couldn't meet their demand because there was, what I think, from a climate science perspective, predictable, not force majeure, but you know, something that is going to occur again. There was predictable drought, and therefore they weren't able to produce the amount of electricity that they were required to produce.
Despite them saying that they have all this excess.
That's right.
That giant lake you saw in Wisconsin was 10 feet low this year.
Yeah, and then they're making another movie, since this is a movie event, about the Romaine River, which is the next one on the chopping block. And Hydro-Quebec has basically changed its strategy from the 70s and 80s and really the early 90s of, hey, we're going to do this grand plan, to, hey, more like an addict, you know, this is our last one, I promise, this is our last one, I promise.
Clint?
Yeah, all this talk about bringing in this extra lines down from Canada and stuff, and I know in the past they've had some issues with some of the wind projects in-state that are going up in the North Country and stuff, in the hills and stuff, is improving those transmission lines. I mean, why are we spending $1.2 billion to import energy when we already have excess, when we have these great wind resources and projects in the mountains that if we improve our local lines, and with the, I'm sure Hydro-Quebec wouldn't let us tap into those lines to use those lines to transmit our power. So, I mean...
Yeah, and again, for the North Country portion, the first 140 miles, you couldn't tap in, even if...
You want, yeah,
Because it's DC.
Yeah.
The public utilities job, I mean, I used to work at the commission, that's why I moved to New Hampshire, and their job is to look at affordability, reliability, and safety. And the guy who delivered us the Great Depression, who turned into this sort of criminal, Samuel Insull, who was eventually absolved, but you know, had to flee the country during the Great Depression, is the guy who sort of developed the central power plant idea that allowed us to do rural electrification and a lot of the things that made this country great over the last 50 years. But now we're looking at a very different future because of climate change and stuff, and it just doesn't make sense to me that we're continuing to pursue big, dangerous power lines where somebody can come along with a truck and, you know, knock it out for millions of Americans. It's just not, it doesn't make sense. And so this distributed generation, which is the name for this wind power and whatnot, that could happen in region, is a much safer, more reliable, and probably a more affordable way to do it, depending on economies of scale and stuff. But
Did you have a question?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Am I interpreting this that New Hampshire is not necessarily going to benefit from this whatsoever, and yet we are in fact a corridor?
Yes.
It appears that way right now.
Help me to understand. Are there any negative effects that would in fact happen to our residents here in the state of New Hampshire as a result of high power lines and electricity being diverted through New Hampshire?
Certainly.
That could potentially maybe harm us?
Certainly impacts on property values, on view sheds, you know, which are clearly very important.
Why do we
In
need
the
it?
White Mountains in the North Country to that tourist-based
Right.
economy. Health impacts for people who are too close to those lines is.
As a state, why would we even entertain this? Why is our public utilities commission even entertaining this? Or allowing the acceptance of a proposal?
Oh, well, part of the problem is that the first approvals that they need to seek are at the federal level. So the PUC is really at the end of the line to approve a PPA, but I mean, once you get to a purchase power agreement, you know, the project will be so far along.
Yeah.
So that, and it's very difficult for us to go down to Washington and participate in those proceedings.
the people who can deny this at the top, besides Barack Obama, are Hillary Clinton and Stephen Schumer, the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Energy, because those are the two agencies that need to grant this presidential permit, because because this line crosses an international border. And so, you know, if you're going to apply pressure at the federal level at this early stage, that's the place where you really need to focus.
Why wouldn't our state?
And calling Senator Shaheen and making sure that she understands that the people in the North Country, the politicians in the North Country, like their executive counselor and Gallus are opposed to this, I think is really pretty important.
I do believe, I know I was at with the Ratepayers Advisory Board, and we had Northern Pass present things, and I think what they were saying for the benefit of New Hampshire was our rates would remain low, it would give jobs to North Country, and what were the other?
Property tax.
And property taxes, it would help property taxes, which to me, it didn't add up, but they were really, and the other thing was, it would help meet New Hampshire's mission for reducing carbon, because the governor has pledged, a certain reduction in carbon emissions, and it would help meet that goal. So
Only if
that
they
is
take
what
steps
I'm
on
saying.
Going back, carbon credits?
Yes.
For sequestering and carbon credits for the benefit of the New Hampshire residents?
I
Are
think just
we-
meeting the state's goals of reducing carbon.
It's a claim, but it's
It's a
not
claim,
backed up. They're
but
not
it's-
showing how that will happen.
That
But
is
is there,
correct.
do we have a relationship with NSTAR?
With
NSTAR and NU are merging. NSTAR, it has a much bigger presence in the southern
Does-
part of New England.
Does New
but
Hampshire have a relationship with them? I'm here,
I don't know
I
what
thought
you
I
mean by,
heard you say that we
mean
did
by
not
New
have,
Hampshire, but
I thought-
Public Service of New Hampshire.
correct,
Is
does not have a relationship,
with
correct?
NU they do, because they're a subsidiary of NU, so they're part of the same company. And NU is considering merging with NSTAR.
Okay, thank you.
And just one thing I want to make clear, Alex mentioned the presidential permit process.
Mhm.
That process, because it requires a decision from the Department of Energy, triggers the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act, which means this will undergo serious review, an environmental impact statement. So that's, the
This
EIS.
is the Canadian version for the
Right.
Rupert River.
This one should be a lot
Yeah.
bigger than what you see there.
Yeah,
So there are a lot of questions that have not been answered yet, and this environmental impact statement process is where a lot of those answers should be answered. And the more members of the public who are pushing, who are asking the right questions and insisting on answers, that's what will expose a lot more about this project and give us a sense of what the benefits are, if there are any, and what the real costs are.
what can we do at a state level?
There will be a permitting process by the Energy Facilities Site Evaluation Committee, which consists of a number of agency representatives. So in addition to that federal process, there is that state permitting process. The Public Utilities Commission will get involved with power purchase agreements.
Make sure that Senator Larson, hears what we talked about tonight, and understands the full implications of this. I mean, they're the ones who ultimately can say, hey, we can regulate this differently, and we can demand that we have conservation and efficiency in place of 1,200 unnecessary megawatts.
Is that the only person to contract?
No, for the governor, very important.
all your
Anybody on
reps,
the executive
anybody?
council,
Yeah.
the people on the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, in this drastically different legislation that we have now.
And as meetings crop up throughout the state, go to the meetings, ask questions, even if it's up in North Country, drive up there, be a part of the meeting, ask the questions. Jonathan?
Yeah, just on that note, if you are interested in getting more information about what meetings to attend, Jessica will be getting an email list together here, and you can sign up with her afterwards. She will be able to connect you with a lot of those.
And we run a listserv called Big Hydro Is Not Green at googlegroups.com, and you can sign up for that as well. Maybe Jessica can send that address around.
I saw hands over here, was that
Yeah,
Ruth?